Ever feel like there are unseen forces shaping the world, like pulling strings behind the scenes?
It's a feeling a lot of people have, and it's what Jane Mayer digs into in her book Dark Money.
Dark money. Okay, so what's that all about?
It's an investigation into the rise of the radical right in American politics, but not just like the surface level stuff. It goes deep, uncovering how a select group of ultra-wealthy individuals and families have poured money into influencing, well, everything.
So, like, secret billionaires controlling things. Sounds a little conspiracy theory-ish, doesn't it?
You might think so, but Mayer backs it up with meticulous research. She traces the roots of this movement, the strategies they use, and the impact they've had on everything from elections to the Supreme Court.
Okay, so who are these people? Are we talking like Illuminati or something?
Not quite, but some of the names might surprise you. She starts with the Koch family, as in the Koch brothers.
The Koch brothers, right. They're known for, like, their libertarian views and big political donations. What's so shocking about them?
Well, Mayer uncovers a pretty unsettling backstory. She connects the Koch family fortune to some pretty dark chapters in history.
Like what?
Their wealth was built in part through oil deals with, get this, Stalin's Soviet Union and Hitler's Nazi Germany back in the 1930s.
Whoa, that's not something you hear every day.
Yeah, it's a pretty jarring origin story for a family that later becomes synonymous with American free market capitalism, right?
Totally. So how does someone go from profiting off dictatorships to advocating for, like, limited government? How did that happen?
Mayer digs into that. It seems the family patriarch, Fred Koch, had a real turning point after working in the Soviet Union. He saw firsthand the brutality of a totalitarian regime.
Ah, so that's what sparked his anti-communism and distrust of big government.
Exactly. And these beliefs were deeply instilled in his sons, Charles and David.
So, like, childhood experiences shaping worldviews. It makes you think, huh.
Definitely. And Mayer really meticulously shows how these early influences shaped Charles Koch, leading him to embrace libertarian ideas and ultimately use his fortune to promote them.
Okay, so we've got this historical backdrop, but how did Charles Koch go from, like, oil tycoon to political mastermind? Did he just start cutting checks to candidates he liked?
It's way more complicated than that. Mayer shows how his approach evolved over time. He realized that real change wouldn't come from just backing individual politicians.
So he was thinking bigger picture.
Right. He wanted to shift the entire intellectual and cultural landscape. Instead of direct donations to campaigns, he poured millions into building a network of think tanks, advocacy groups, and even academic institutions.
Wow, a whole network. What were they focused on?
These organizations, while seemingly diverse, were all united by their dedication to promoting free market ideology, deregulation, and basically shrinking the government's role in, well, almost everything.
So he was creating, like, an echo chamber for his ideas.
In a way, yes. But it was much more sophisticated than that. These organizations produced research, policy papers, all designed to give an intellectual veneer to their libertarian worldview.
So it wasn't just about money. It was about ideas, too.
Absolutely. They understood the power of ideas to shape public opinion and ultimately influence policy.
Clever. But wasn't it just Charles Koch doing all of this? Were there others involved?
Oh, he wasn't alone. Mayer introduces a whole cast of characters, all united by their shared libertarian beliefs and, importantly, their willingness to use their fortunes to advance those beliefs.
Give us some names. Who are we talking about?
Well, there's Richard Mellon Scaife, heir to the Mellon banking fortune. You've got Joseph Coors, the beer magnate, and Art Pope, a North Carolina businessman who built a conservative empire. These are just a few of the key players.
So a whole club of wealthy ideologues, and they were all working together.
Yes, they coordinated their efforts, pooling their resources and expertise to create a powerful force for their agenda.
So it wasn't just about money, it was about, like, strategy and organization, too.
Exactly. They understood that to achieve lasting change, they needed to build a movement, a network that could operate on multiple fronts.
So what did that look like in practice? What kind of tactics did they use?
Well, we've talked about the think tanks and the research, but they also funded legal challenges to undermine regulations they didn't like. They launched aggressive PR campaigns to shape public opinion. And, get this, they even engaged in what Mayer calls astroturfing.
Astroturfing, what's that? Sounds like something you do to your lawn.
It's kind of like that, but in the political realm. It's about creating the illusion of grassroots support for a cause, when in reality, it's all being bankrolled and orchestrated by powerful special interests.
So, like, fake grassroots movements. to make it look like their agenda is popular.
Exactly. Mayer gives some chilling examples of how they used this tactic to manipulate public discourse, whether it was opposing environmental regulations or pushing for tax cuts that primarily benefited the wealthy.
That's pretty sneaky. It makes you wonder what else is going on behind the scenes that we don't know about.
And that's Mayer's point, right? She's raising the alarm about how this hidden world of political influence is eroding democratic principles.
It's a little scary, to be honest. If a handful of billionaires can operate in the shadows, shaping public opinion and policy, what does that mean for the rest of us?
That's the question we need to grapple with, and it's one we'll continue to explore in the next part of our deep dive into dark money.
Welcome back to our deep dive into dark money. Last time we were talking about how this network of ultra-wealthy donors used some pretty interesting tactics.
Yeah, like that astroturfing thing.
Right, exactly.
Making it look like there's all this grassroots support for their agenda, when really it's just them pulling the strings.
And that's just one of the tools in their arsenal.
So what else are we talking about here? How else did they exert their influence?
Well, one key thing Mayer emphasizes is how they weaponized philanthropy.
Weaponized philanthropy. What do you mean by that?
They turned charitable giving into a tool for political influence. So instead of donating to museums or hospitals, they were funding organizations that would push their ideology.
Exactly.
Clever.
Right. And it was incredibly effective.
Give us some examples, like what kinds of organizations are we talking about?
Well, think tanks played a huge role.
Think tanks, like those policy research groups.
Exactly. Places like the Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation.
I have heard of those.
They became the intellectual powerhouses for this movement, churning out research and policy papers that provided an academic veneer to their libertarian views.
So it wasn't just about lobbying or donating to campaigns. It was about shaping the whole intellectual landscape.
Right, and these ideas would then filter out into the media, into public discourse.
It's like planting seeds.
Exactly, and those seeds would grow into a whole forest of ideas that supported their agenda.
Fascinating.
And it wasn't just think tanks, they also poured money into legal advocacy.
Legal advocacy? What's that about?
Using lawsuits and legal challenges to, undermine regulations or push for policies they favored.
So they were trying to shape the laws themselves.
Precisely. And one striking example Mayer highlights is the rise of the Federalist Society.
The Federalist Society? Remind me, what's that?
It's a conservative legal organization that's had a huge impact on the judiciary.
Oh, right. They've been incredibly successful in getting their people into judgeships, haven't they?
Exactly, and their influence extends far beyond the courts. Mayer shows how this network has targeted academia as well.
Academia, like colleges and universities.
Yep. Funding programs and professorships that promote their ideology.
Wow, so they're really playing the long game, trying to shape young minds.
Absolutely. It's about influencing the next generation of thinkers and leaders.
So they're hitting all these different levels, from think tanks to the courts to academia. It's like a multi-pronged strategy.
Exactly, and it's been remarkably effective. Mayer argues that their efforts have fundamentally shifted the political landscape.
So their fingerprints are all over the place, on everything from tax cuts to deregulation to environmental policy.
And as Mayer documents, their influence just keeps growing, especially with the rise of dark money, which has made it even harder to track their activities.
It's like they're operating in the shadows.
And that's the scary part, right? This lack of transparency makes it incredibly difficult to hold them accountable.
It feeds into that feeling that the system is rigged, that ordinary people don't have a voice.
Exactly, and that's why Mayer's book is so important. It's shining a light on this hidden world of political influence.
Making us aware of the forces that are shaping our society, whether we realize it or not.
And hopefully empowering us to push back.
So what can we do? Is there any hope for reversing these trends?
That's the big question, and it's one we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive into dark money.
We're back with our deep dive into dark money. So far, we've uncovered this hidden network of ultra-wealthy donors and their impact on American politics.
And how they've used everything from think tanks to astroturfing to advance their agenda.
Yeah, it's kind of unsettling to realize how much influence this group has.
It definitely raises some big questions about the future of our democracy.
That's what I want to focus on now. What are the long-term consequences of all this?
Yeah.
What happens when a handful of billionaires have so much sway over the political process?
Well, one of the most concerning things Mayer points out is the erosion of accountability.
Accountability.
Right? Like when these donors can funnel money through these complex networks of nonprofits, it becomes almost impossible to trace where it's coming from.
So it's hard to know who's really behind all these campaigns and lobbying efforts.
Exactly.
And if you can't trace the money, you can't hold anyone responsible.
That's the problem. This lack of transparency creates a breeding ground for corruption and undue influence.
And it just breeds cynicism, right? People start to feel like the system is rigged against them.
Totally. It feeds into that sense of powerlessness, like your voice doesn't matter because these wealthy donors are calling all the shots.
And it's not just about feeling powerless. I think it also contributes to political polarization. Well, when people feel like the system is ignoring them, they're more likely to retreat into their own ideological bubbles.
I see what you mean. It's like an us versus them mentality.
Exactly. And that makes it even harder to have constructive dialogue and find common ground.
It creates a vicious cycle.
So where do we go from here? Is there any way to, reverse these trends?
Mayer doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but she does point to some potential solutions.
Like what?
Well, campaign finance reform is a big one.
Trying to limit the influence of money in politics.
Right. And there are a lot of different ideas out there. Some people advocate for overturning the Citizens United decision, which, as you know, really opened the floodgates for corporate spending in elections.
And others want stricter disclosure requirements so we can actually see who's donating to these political groups.
Exactly. More transparency is key.
But even with new laws, we still need to make sure they're actually being enforced.
Absolutely. We need robust oversight and accountability.
But Mayer also emphasizes that real change ultimately depends on us, the citizens.
We can't just sit back and expect the government to fix everything.
We need to be more informed about these issues, demand more transparency from our elected officials.
Hold them accountable.
Exactly.
It's about being vigilant, questioning the sources of information we consume, and speaking out against this kind of hidden influence.
So dark money is more than just an exposé. It's a call to action.
It's a wake-up call.
And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in protecting our democracy.
Well said.
If you're interested in learning more about this, we highly recommend checking out Dark Money. You can find a link to purchase the book in the show notes.
It's a fascinating and, frankly, pretty disturbing read, but it's essential for anyone who cares about the future of American politics.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, please consider subscribing to our channel for more thought-provoking discussions.
And sharing it with your friends. The more people who are aware of these issues, the better.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.